I decided really to make this film because I realized that we were sort of close to 5 years into the Iraq War, and there really hadn't been a single film that had a Muslim or Iraqi character in it. All the films have really had American film. They've all been from an American point of view. They've all had American characters, and I was just very interested myself to find out, who are the insurgents, for example, in Iraq? Are these patriots, or are they all sort of foreign fighters, as we've been told by the American media? So it was really an investigation for myself to find out what was actually happening. And we had a very interesting time meeting the Marines, for example, who were in Haditha from Kilo Company that day, getting a sense of who they really were, and then meeting with survivors of the 17th and some of the insurgents. And we based the screenplay from these meetings that we have with them.
The point really I wanted to make, and I don't know if Nick already made it, I went out and came back, is that really this is just one incident out of many, many thousands of incidents in Iraq. And to a certain extent, it's not as horrific as the others that go unreported. Whether it's the women raped inside their homes, whether it's the children getting killed at night during night raids, because night raids don't necessarily follow IED bombs going off in Iraq. They do them routinely to search people's homes. They do them in the middle of the night. They break down the doors. If anybody shows any sign of disapproval, they might shoot them. They steal their property and so on. And one other point I wanted to make is that this and the atrocities that we know about, like the Abu Ghraib torture episodes, like the raping of the 14-year-old Abir, which became headline news across the world, and they burnt her body after they raped her. All of these incidents that hit the headlines were actually revealed by US soldiers or by luck somebody had a camera, like the Haditha one.
I completely agree with you. I think that there are many Hadithas and many incidents. I think it's representative of the kind of thing that happened, and in a sense, the only reason we know about Haditha is because there was reporting, and because the misreporting on the part of the American army from Ramadi was so inaccurate that the journalist just called up and called the coroner and said, were 15 civilians killed in a bomb blast, which was the original report? And he said no, they were all executed, and they were shot through the head. So it was a very simple way of knowing that there was a complete misrepresentation. And I think that the videotapes that were shot simply backed that up and were then showed, of course, across the world. So this is kind of how we know about it.
The population in Iraq, even as early as July when I visited Baghdad in 2003, were overwhelmingly sympathetic to the resistance in Iraq, the resistance against the occupation. And unfortunately, a climate has been created where the resistance in Iraq against occupation has been linked up to the terrorism of Al-Qaeda and the terror attacks they mount. The Al-Qaeda terror attacks in Iraq are very, very unpopular. People condemn them. I have not met a single Iraqi who would approve of these terrorist acts. But people do distinguish between the resistance and the terror attacks. And routinely, Iraqis would say these terror attacks are in fact the work of the US occupation itself to divide and rule Iraqis, claiming that Sunnis are killing Shia, Shia killing Sunnis, etc., etc. But just to go back to the earlier point, and in July 2003, Iraqis were telling me about torture in prisons, but no mainstream newspaper or channel would talk about the torture in prisons in Iraq. Until nearly a year and a half later, more than a year later, US soldiers started posting those horrific pictures of the torture in Abu Ghraib. Iraqi sources are regarded as suspect, journalists, editors, and so on. Even the braver journalists who send it to the editors, if it's an Iraqi source making the allegation or the claim, it gets binned. It doesn't get reported even as an allegation. And that is important. But if once the US soldiers or US sources confirm an incident or reveal it, then it hits the headlines. And that is why we don't get the daily atrocities. The daily atrocities, Iraqis know about them and live them. But the ones that hit the headlines are the ones generally that get either reported by British or US soldiers in action. And there is one, I'm sure you've seen that footage, Nick, of US soldiers who joined Veterans Against the War, Iraq Veterans Against the War in the United States. They became campaigners against the war. Some of the stories they tell are so moving, you just can't help but break down and cry. And what they tell you is that on the first day, a new US soldier joins a unit, they would take that soldier out at night. That was in 2003, back into very early on in the occupation, not just later on after the resistance grew stronger and so on. They would take the young soldier out at night with shovels and Kalashnikovs in a US army car. They would go outside the cities. If they see an Iraqi walking the street in the countryside, they would shoot him dead to show the soldier what to do. Then they put a shovel and a Kalashnikov next to the Iraqi man they have just killed, so that the claim is made that that Iraqi man is going to plant an IED. And that is the initiation ceremony of the new soldier.
I think my position is very clear, which is once you have declared war, events like this happen. They happen in any war, they happen in every war. And the architects of the war are really the people who need to be blamed. They are the war criminals, and you can't really, there's not a lot of point going after 17-year-old Marines who are the poor, least educated group for example, in the United States, who are over in Iraq at the moment, who know nothing about the Iraqi culture, have never been out of America before, and are just trying to survive until the next day. So, when I met with the Marines outside Camp Pendleton, the Marines from Kilo Company who had been there, I was amazed kind of what a mess they were. They had all been through Fallujah before they'd been in Haditha. In Fallujah, they'd all lost, friends who they were fighting alongside. They'd killed, I don't know how many people in the street fighting that they'd seen. And they'd sort of become, I would say, dehumanized and quite psychotic. I mean, they were all having amazing dreams at night. They were all on very strong tranquilizers. It was quite hard to talk to them at first. They were very suspicious. And I didn't feel that there was much point in making a film that was just going to condemn them out of hand. In fact, I felt that they were as much victims as the other people that I met. And I think that then we met with the survivors from the massacre and got a sense as to what had happened that day and how they had a very complicated relationship with the insurgency. It wasn't a straightforward relationship because insurgency was very divided. It wasn't just a Sunni Iraqi insurgency. There were also foreign fighters who were beginning to worry everybody very much in Haditha because they were doing their own executions and they were in control of Haditha, and they were not in any way being controlled now by the local people. So there was a much more complicated version, I felt, I was getting of who the insurgents are than certainly what I had been reading in the press. I wasn't getting, all insurgents were sort of lumped together. And I felt it was important to reflect the difference between people who were probably if they'd been doing the same kind of thing in this country, we would regard them as patriots. Or if they'd been around at the time of the Boston Tea Party, they would have been patriots. And it seemed to me very important to give them a humanity and a human face and to understand who these people are. And I don't think in the West and in America, this side has been portrayed at all. And I thought it was a very important side. And I'm sure one of the reasons that Hollywood hasn't portrayed that is because there are no bankable Iraqi stars. And Omar Sharif is getting too old. So I felt this was something that needed to be portrayed as well. And just the dilemma of the people who get caught in between these two groups, the Marines and the insurgents, who whatever they do is going to be wrong. And I think, if anything, yeah, we did tone down the massacre itself. Because it was just, I mean, I looked at some of those pictures, and sometimes when you look at the pictures of the massacre, you kind of know that you're never going to feel the same way about anything again. That's so horrible. And particularly when it's 3-year-old kids who, you know, whose brains, their heads are split open, they've clearly been executed at point-blank range. And there are bullets just everywhere, in the ceiling, in the fans. I mean, you just get a sense of guys who've completely gone out of control. But I think, you know, we produced something that I felt was hard-hitting enough that would create, I mean, I think when you're making a film, you can't make something that is so horrendous that your audience simply aren't going to see through it. And I think the most important thing with a film is that at the end of it, you have a conscious audience who are thinking about what they've seen, who aren't overloaded by sheer horror. Although at times in making the film, that's exactly what I felt. I think the character of Ahmed was very accurate. I mean, he was based on somebody that I met who was in the insurgency and, you know, was a family man, had a couple of kids, had been in the army, and like, you know, most of the people in the army, I mean, Haditha is a Sunni area that was quite loyal to Saddam, so a lot of the army officers traditionally came from Haditha. So it was a wealthier city than a lot of other Iraqi cities. It also had the hydroelectric power, and a lot of the oil was going through there. And I think he was very reflective of those characters. I don't think he was so loyal to Saddam that he wasn't entirely unhappy when Saddam went. But when he saw his town reduced to chaos and the electricity stopped working and his kids weren't going to school and everything that he knew seemed to be falling down around him, and he was also demobilized from the army and I think was given $50, he was no longer able to support his extended family, which is the tradition in Iraq. It's not just your immediate family, your kids and so on that you're supporting, but there are a lot of other people who are dependent on you. When he was no longer able to do that, that's kind of when people formed the insurgency. And the original Iraqi insurgency was very much based around army lines from Saddam's army. So I don't know what position he would have held. And then when the initial insurgency ran out of money, they became more heavily influenced by Al-Qaeda and so on, who were coming over from Syria and Saudi Arabia and were getting money from outside of Iraq. And that's when the problems really occurred within the insurgency. So, I mean, I think his character, I mean, obviously, you're talking about one character in a 90-minute film, but I think we got as much of that as I felt we could into it. Obviously, it's not just a film about the insurgency, but I think the humanity of Ahmed was there. I think we understood as much as we could. And I think, I mean, I hope there'll be a lot more studies done on the insurgency, and that we will regard the word of the insurgency in a very different way.
In the last 6 months, the United States has increased its air bombardments in Iraq by 400%. Goes completely unnoticed now. within 6 months, they have increased air bombardments across Iraq by 400%. This is part of a strategy to reduce manpower losses on the ground. They reduced some of the night raids because they were getting people shooting at them and so on in the streets, and they increased these air raids, and they are hoping to have more Iraqis kill Iraqis by recruiting and creating their own militias. Everywhere you go, every district in Baghdad, except Sadr City and 2-3 other districts where the US forces cannot even enter, they are building local militias, arming them, financing them, each locality by locality. They are planning to divide Baghdad into 30 district zones. They have already created about 12 of them, all walled by concrete. They are the killing zones of the future. If any of these districts in Baghdad rebel, or they can wipe it out. Some military strategy to divide Baghdad into 30 concreted zones. But one thing I want to say is to thank you for the attempt to portray the US soldiers. I think it's very important, and I agree fully with you there, that most US soldiers, at least, are as much victims as the people they kill. They are youngsters, mostly unemployed from the United States, young men and women who get recruited into the armed forces and get trained to kill and be dehumanized. And the war veterans in the United States, I think, reflect this quite well.
Well, we didn't get official Pentagon permission to talk to the Marines. We just did it. You know, we actually talked to one of the mothers first of one of the Marines. In fact, one of the Marines that on the night that he came back from Iraq, he was extremely disturbed, and he broke into a truck and then sort of started having all these sort of flashbacks and things, and ended up driving the truck into a house and was actually about to stand trial. And she heard we were doing the film and got in touch with us, so through her we met her son and a couple of other guys. We wanted to get Marines who had seen active service or had been in Haditha itself or through Fallujah, which was the kind of background that the Kilo Company Marines had been through, and to also get Iraqis who had been through this kind of thing as well. And I think that's probably what makes it feel so real. The only professional actor in the film is the insurgent, Ahmed, who's an Iraqi actor called Falah, who's well known in Iraq. Worked here a bit with at the Old Vic, in fact. All the other actors, well, I call them actors, they're all non-actors. And we met them all various ways. We got obviously in touch with the Veterans Against the War. We met a lot of Marines that way. Then we put ads in bases, and we probably met about 1,000 people who've been in service one way or another. And you know, the way we were working was I was working with the casting director who, you know, would get everyone to sort of describe what they'd been through, and then a lot of the people were pretty cut off from their emotions. It was quite hard to get them to role play or anything. And then we got a sort of hardcore who we kept. And in fact, I tried using, originally we were going to have a sort of known actor to play the part that Elliot plays, the Ramirez part. And we flew him over to Jordan at vast expense, you know, first class and all the rest of it, as proper actors get. And it was a disaster because he really could not be with the real Marines, you know, and he couldn't come up with a performance that felt real next to them. So we had to send him back again, and Elliot's part then got much bigger. He sort of, so it, you know, it was a very interesting experience, and it was very good, I think, working with non-actors who had those experiences, because they could say, well, we would do this, but we wouldn't do that. We would, you know. And so it was very much in the way that I've worked making documentaries, is getting a lot of feedback and a lot of, you know, from the people in the film, which is, for me as a filmmaker, is much more interesting. Being able to get into the emotions of somebody who's very conflicted about what they've been through. On the day that, we filmed Elliot Ramirez having his sort of breakdown in the bathroom. Elliot came to me and said, "Look, I'm having a real problem dealing with this. It's bringing back all the memories of being in Iraq, being in the barracks, because they were living in those barracks and they were with each other and they were wearing uniform all the time." And that was when we filmed that scene. And so in a sense what we were doing in the film was trying to recreate something to bring the reality actually to the people, so they were back in that bubble of being in Iraq again. There are 1 million Iraqis in Jordan, but a lot of them are illegal. And the Jordanian casting director, for example, only had worked with Jordanian actors before. So when we suddenly said, well, actually we want Iraqis to be in the film, we don't want, there are a few stand-ins who are Jordanians, but all the main actors, all the main characters that you see are all Iraqis. We then literally had to sort of send people out into different parts of Oman that nobody had been to before to try and find the Iraqis and find people who would be suitable.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd just like to congratulate Nick for the film, because I think that, I can't think of another piece of film footage of any description that's raised the issues that have been discussed today. And I thought the film was very powerful, and the fact that an audience then gets to discuss, how did Ahmed have a relationship with the Al-Qaeda? How did he distinguish himself from it? What was the nature of the Iraqi resistance? The fact that there's, that people can discuss the way in which the US ordinary soldiers are victims of the situation, the relationship between them and the power structure. These are things which are simply absent from the debate about the war in Iraq 90% of the time. So I think it's a fantastically powerful film, and allows the discussion about the Iraq War to take several steps forward for most people who will see it. And the question I have really is about who will see it, about the distribution of the film, because I'm John Rees, I'm the National Secretary of Respect, and very few people who make a film like this would have chosen to have a preview with a political organisation like that, and I think that's enormously to your credit. And I know that you've been in contact with Stop the War about showing the film nationally, and really my question is this: how is it being distributed, and what can other people in other groups and in other places in the movement do to assist its distribution?
It's been a struggle to get this film out one way or another, and so I'm, so pleased that it's finally kind of going to do something. The company who are distributing the film, a Contender Film, it will be opening on the 1st of February in London, and then I think going to some other cinemas outside of London. Now we're working with the Stop the War Coalition to try and get other cinemas to take the film as well, to try and encourage groups around the country to use the film very much as a discussion point, and also trying to galvanize activity against the war. And the film will also be then, shown on Channel 4 television in the middle of March to coincide with the 5th year of the war in Iraq. But I'm sure that you can either email me at nick@nickbroomfield.com or get in touch with Contender Film, or we can be in touch one way or another.
Or Stop the War.
And I think, or Stop the War. And I think, one way or another, we should just try and do as much as we can and use the film just to get activity going.